Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Trail Trash Podcast. This is Jason, Garrett, John, and we have a nutritional expert tonight. That's right, folks. We just keep raising the bar every single episode. It's getting scary how high we're bringing the raising the bar here. But we actually have a board certified sports dietitian. That's right. She is certified. She's actually also an ultra runner, just like all of us. She has her own podcast, just like us, called Eat for Endurance, and she also does nutritional coaching. So she is a one-stop shop for for all your running and nutritional needs. We have Claire Shorenstein on the show tonight. Thanks for being here with us, Claire. We appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we will dive into it a little bit. I guess before we get into all the nutritional stuff, because I know Garrett has like a small encyclopedia of stuff to ask you. Uh, I guess you've ran some races. I noticed you've ran JFK before. So
hmm
what got you into running? I mean, have you always been a runner?
well, if we go way back, I'm 42, so I've been running for a while. But if we go way back, I'm pretty sure it was like a high school breakup that got me into running. And so a friend saw I was pretty down in the dumps. It was like, why don't you come join the cross country team? I actually I got my master's in oboe performance and among other things, but like I have a background more in music and was very academic and was never much of like a sporty type, but discovered running when I was 15, loved it, and kind of mostly kept up with it. But I didn't really get into distance running until my late 20s when I was living in London. And London has a fantastic running culture, running scene there. And so I ended up kind of, I started with a 10K and then, it goes in half marathon. And then I entered a marathon and then, it just from there, it just kept going. But I was actually in the road running scene for a while and chasing PRs and all of that. And then at a certain point, I was like, yeah, this is not fun anymore. I need to hop back to the trails. And you can see in this lovely background here, these are my redwoods, my home trails here in Aptos, California. And it's just so beautiful. And just coming home, I was living in New York and London all over the place and coming home and really rediscovering these trails, this huge trail system that I never really took advantage of when I was growing up. And that really kind of started all of it. My husband was also very much involved in ultra stuff, so that didn't help. And then, he was running JFK 50, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'll do that too. And so kind of just, got into all that stuff. So yeah, it's been fun. Trails is where it's at for me right now.
So was it him or you first that got into the ultra running thing? Was it him that got you into it, or was it you that got him into it?
Yeah, I think I always loved trails, but he's the one who kind of dragged me into the ultra scene. He started doing like 50Ks and 50 milers and such, and I paced him one year at JFK. And then I was like, yeah, I may as well just do this one. So, now I've done a few 50Ks out here. I took a little break when I had kids, and I have a 4 and a 6 year old, but yeah, kind of at that point now where I'm ready to kind of start doing some longer stuff because I haven't done 50 milers, actually the longest I've done, but ready to do some longer stuff at some point soon.
I mean, 50's not short, Claire. I mean,
I
50,
did it's not. It was hard.
50, she's like, I've only gotten 50 in. I mean, I'm like, 50's pretty good.
Well,
I mean,
well, I say that. I mean, it's kind of garbage to like, put myself down like that, but it's more just in the world of ultra. You know how it is. It's like, oh, 50 is not that long. 50K is not really, yeah, see, he's nodding. He gets it. You know how it is. So, I mean, a lot of the clients I work with are running like multiple 100s. And of course, I work with a lot of marathoners. I work with all kinds of people. But I will say, like, having run a few 50Ks recently, I'm taking a break now, but I'm like, you know what? Maybe I will investigate doing something longer. I don't think I could ever do 100. That's just not something I want to do. Running through the night freaks me out. I don't know.
well,
Maybe
we,
100K.
We've all said that at some point.
yeah,
And
and the funny thing is, I'm literally the butt of the show. I have successfully DNF'd every single 100-mile run, and it's been the same race. So it's like the
Oh
same
no.
race I have failed every single time. So I'm proud of my 50-mile finishes. So
I think
Dude,
you've
I
put
am
more time
proud
on
of,
that trail.
yeah,
Yeah, I think you've put more time on that trail to not finish than anyone else has who has finished.
that's fair. That's fair.
that's funny. That's funny. No, I'm definitely proud of my 50-mile finish. It was very painful. I did
Absolutely.
not know what I was doing at all.
Absolutely. So nutrition, have you always been into like the whole nutrition thing? Was there something that got you like into that field? I mean, it seems like to be something that you had that most people who are nutritionists are pretty passionate about it.
Yeah, definitely. It was a second career for me. I mean, I don't know if you can call my first thing a career, but I came to it later in life, let's say, and had to basically go back to school, get a second master's degree, basically a second bachelor of science, essentially, because we go through as dietitian. So I'm a registered dietitian, and then I have an extra board certification in sports dietetics, which you can only do once you've been a dietitian for so many years and collect, thousands of hours of experience and such. Um, but to become a registered dietitian, you have to go to school for many, many years. You have to do this huge internship. It's this whole thing. So when I actually was interested in it, I didn't really know what I wanted to do after I graduated from college and decided I didn't want to do music anymore and was kind of floating around doing various things, living abroad and all such, all these things. And that's when I got into distance running in my 20s. And that's what kind of got me interested in nutrition because obviously when you're running these shorter distances, you can kind of get away with a lot. As soon as you enter the endurance world, forget it. You're screwed if you don't have your nutrition dialed. And I quickly realized that because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, even running a road marathon, and suffered the consequences. Let's say my first marathon was not pretty. So that's what really kind of got me interested. And, I kind of start digging around. And then I realized actually, maybe I should just go back to school and do this. My parents are doctors. So, like, the whole healthcare field was always an interest of some kind. But, so yeah, I always entered the nutrition field knowing that I eventually wanted to do sports. It just took a while to get there.
I got you. Well, I've always joked that I got all the fun questions. So Garrett, I'm sure you've got your laundry list of questions. So fire away, my friend.
Well, so my where I would come from with these questions is a little bit different than the trail
Okay.
and ultra scene. Because for the longest time growing up, I was a heavier kid, and then I turned into a more of a fitness fanatic, right? And I wanted to be a certified strength conditioning specialist. So I have a good understanding of how nutrition works when it comes to gaining muscle mass and putting all that stuff on, which is very different than trail and ultra stuff, where you don't necessarily want to be, 250 pounds, of solid rock. So before I do dive into that, though, we do have a listener question, and I want to do it now because
Okay.
otherwise I'll forget. He would describe himself on his fat to fit journey, so he's kind of along the same lines that I was. And his question is, for heavier people, we tend to burn more calories per 45 minutes. Besides gels and liquid, which only gives so much nutrition, what other foods can he consume when he has limited space? Because he has it looks like he has a rather small pack. So it sounds like he just needs to maybe look at, I would say, goo roctane or something along those lines. But if he's having trouble with some liquid calories, what other nutrient dense, calorie dense, but also good for you foods that aren't Twinkies and Ho-Hos that I love to eat when I run? What are some things that Chris Ferguson, our friend out in Arizona, can start looking into for his fat to fit? And he is actually looking at doing his first ultras as well. So kind of get him a good foundation.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. So the first thing I'd say, just to kind of set the stage here, we have a lot of recommendations, especially in the context of everyday nutrition and even in some sports nutrition contexts where it's like gram per kilogram of body weight of something. So you might have heard like, maybe like your carb goals or your protein goals for the day or whatever. It's the body weight based thing. When it comes to performance nutrition, like like while you're running, it's actually not body weight based at all, because we're limited I mean, this doesn't mean that we can, so this will be a two-part question. So it means that we can only absorb so much sugar in our gut. So sugar, carbs, however you want to call it, glucose, and other simple sugars. That's really what our body prefers, what our muscle prefers to burn when we're doing any form of endurance exercise, and especially a higher intensity exercise. And it's limited because we have these transporters. Like, let's say for glucose, it can only carry about 1 gram of glucose per minute or 60 grams per hour. So if you hear that, maybe you've heard the whole like 30 to 60 grams an hour or 60 to 90 grams an hour of carbs. That's because we're limited by what we can absorb. And then think of like a river. So you have a river with one bridge. It gets all jammed up because everyone's trying to get across that bridge. But if you add a second bridge, let's say another type of sugar, so you're using fructose or something else, then you can get more across. And that's part of why we can absorb a little bit more. So I'm only addressing this because the question's implying that because he's larger, he needs more per hour. And yes, we can add more in terms of like foods and try to address that. But the fundamental thing is that we're still aiming for a similar gram per hour amount. And I say similar in terms of the guidelines that we're going for. So for ultra marathon distances, it's 60 to 90 grams an hour, and you have to kind of play with that. And I know we probably are going to address training the gut at some point, so we can talk more about that. But as long as you're in that range and we're getting it from whatever combination of liquid, solid, real foods, like whatever, then that's okay. That's a carb amount. Now with ultra, we're usually adding real foods that contain some protein. We want to get a little protein per hour. We want potentially for the really long stuff to get a little bit of fat as tolerated. So in terms of like the actual foods, unfortunately, there's no like magic answer of like, this is the best food for you. I'm sure if you've ever talked to a dietitian, the most frustrating thing is like a lot of our answers are, it depends, right? So, but it's true because it really does depend on what this person tolerates. So what works for me, what works for you guys may not work for the listener, right? So the most important thing is, okay, cool. Well, number one, what are you even taking in at baseline? So when you're out there running, how many grams of carbs are you taking per hour? Some people look at calories, but really we want to focus on carbs. What types of things are you tolerating? Do you tolerate liquid nutrition? Do you tolerate gels? Do you tolerate foods? Like, what have you played around with? And then you can kind of go from there. What's available at this race you're running? What can you carry? Like you have to ask logistical questions. What is going to be at the aid station? So there's a lot, like this seems like a pretty like simple question, but it's actually not, because there are so many factors that feed into it. So yeah, you can certainly play around with different types of fluids. The thing that I would say here is you really need to know, well, are you a heavy and or salty sweater? Sometimes bigger bodied people sweat a little bit more. So yeah, you're raising your hand. There you go. Yeah. So what is your sweat rate? Have you done a sweat test where, you just need a scale and you measure your fluid loss over an hour? It's a pretty simple test. You just weigh yourself naked before and after, say like a 60-minute run. And for every 1 pound or 16 ounces of fluid you lose, you just get a sense of like how much you need to replace, and we can play around with that. But anyways, my point is, you can use these things to guide the choices you make. Like if you're an extremely heavy, salty sweater, that's gonna be part of your decision making when it comes to the things you're reaching for, versus someone who isn't. So making fueling decisions, it's like you have to think of all these different things. I know I'm like giving this huge answer in response to this listener question. It's like opening the whole box, the whole can of worms, right? But these are all the things that we have to think about. So going back to his question, I would say just because you're a bigger bodied person, it doesn't mean that the amount you should take in, and especially that you can tolerate, may be higher compared to someone who's smaller. We still need to start, let's say, if you're not used to fueling at all and you're new to ultra distances, maybe we're not starting at 60 at all. Maybe we're starting at 40 grams an hour and then working our way up slowly. And for food choices, you have to don't think about nutrient dense or healthy or all that stuff. Like, it's an ultra marathon. We're not like trying to have like kale salads or something, you know, like if a Twinkie like is your thing and that makes you feel good, great. If you know you have flat Coke and that does the trick, great. Like, we're not trying to reach for health foods right now. We're trying to get through a race, you know?
Hmm.
So I would be cautious, especially because this person is coming from a fat to fit, as you say. I'm assuming, and this is assumption, but I'm assuming there might be some good food, bad food mentality or something, you know, I'm thinking of this as healthy and not healthy. When it comes to ultras and fueling it and really that performance nutrition setting, we need to kind of let go of that a little bit. Sometimes we just need quick energy, simple carbs. We don't want to be consuming fiber and vegetables, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, because fiber is just going to cause all sorts of GI
Yes,
issues, and then you're just going to
exactly.
be hiding behind a tree and hoping no one
Yep,
hears you back there. So,
yep,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
that's why I like Pop Tarts. Pop Tarts are always
Yeah,
one of my
there
go-tos.
you go. There
So,
you go.
and when I talk to people at work, they're like, "What do you eat?" I'm like, "Pop Tarts." They're like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, there's no fiber, so there's no GI
Mm-hmm.
issues. It's a simple sugar. It's easy to digest, and it
Yep,
tastes good. It's something I look forward to. So
perfect.
yeah, I
Then
eat
that
Pop
works for you.
Tarts. So
Yeah, that's a great pre-run fuel too, you know. And some people may not like, I don't like Pop Tarts personally, but there's nothing wrong with Pop Tarts, you know what I mean?
hmm
Find what works for you.
hmm Yeah. Um, so let's kind of go in because we've kind of talked about it a little bit with the fiber aspect of everything.
Hmm.
When should you cut out certain kinds of foods coming into a race? I know that you don't want a
Mm.
bunch of roughage, 2 days before, because that's just gonna sit there and cause some other issues that you may be trying to avoid. When we get closer to a race, we obviously try to keep it super simple. I add an S in my kiss. Keep it super simple, stupid. Um, like just bare bones kind of stuff, very bland. But how far
Yeah.
out should we maybe start that? Is a week too far? 2 days too far? Or too close? Or where should we start kind of eliminating foods as we get ready for race day?
Yeah, so typically, so what you're alluding to is what we would call a carb load, right? And before any event, longer than 90 minutes actually. So it doesn't even have to be ultra marathon. It could be someone who's running a half marathon if they're slightly on the slower side, um or a marathon, whatever. So for that, we're usually doing a 2 or 3 day carb load. Um traditionally like traditionally, technically, like research is saying 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight for 36 to 48 hours. That is really high. Most people have trouble with that. So a really great alternative, and usually what I'm doing with clients is 8 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight for 3 days prior. And in that context, in terms of fiber, so I mean, we're not eating more food. We are shifting calories away from fat in particular, and to an extent, protein, and bringing them to carbs essentially. And we are going for slightly lower fiber carbs, and we're reducing vegetables and all of that. We're tapering down fiber slightly. The thing that we don't want to do is completely cut out fiber, because what that's going to do is you're going to get constipated most likely, right? Like, you're changing, especially if your diet is normally very rich in fiber. So I feel like as runners, we're constantly straddling this line between, like, we don't want to poop at certain times and we really want to poop at other times. So it's like, and then in ultra, if you're out there long enough, it's totally normal to poop. And you shouldn't be afraid of, like, if you're out there for 24 hours, like, obviously you're gonna have a bowel movement. Like, don't be afraid of that. If you have, like, diarrhea, it's a different issue. But anyways, my point is that we don't want to remove fiber so much that that creates other problems. So maybe if you're doing a 3 day carb load, maybe for the first 2 days, you're tapering down fiber slightly. And then it's really just that last day that we're going really low. And then you can think about, okay, well, what helps me have a bowel movement? Maybe it's prunes or prune juice or coffee or apple juice, because obviously you still want to go to the bathroom. The other thing with that is, since we're talking about carb load, is as you increase your carbohydrate, you want to make sure you increase your fluid intake above your baseline to just keep everything going. Because when you have more carbs, you need more water, which is why anytime someone cuts carbohydrates out, you lose water weight, right? So yeah, that's obviously not going in depth into carb loading, but it's just a little bit touching on that fiber piece at least.
Sure, sure. And when should we start adding electrolytes into that? Because I do know that you do want to
Mm,
add some electrolytes prior to, because you can't really, and I've kind of never fully understood this.
mm.
You're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to pee. Any excess is just going to be flushed out. So you can't really do that for a couple days before, I wouldn't think, because like I said, any excesses, do you just do that the
Yeah.
night before? But then again, I don't want to feel bloated on race morning. I don't, so
Well, okay,
another
here's
fine
the
line
thing.
there. So
So, okay, here's the thing about bloating. Oh, yeah, and this ties in back into the carb loading thing. So, you should expect, if you are doing this correctly, you should expect to gain some weight because you're increasing your water intake, you're increasing your carb intake, and you will probably be a little bit bloated and puffy. Like that's going to happen. And what that means is that your energy stores are well stocked and you are well hydrated. So, don't just keep like don't get on the scale if that's going to freak you out. Wear comfortable clothes that are loose, and remember why you're doing it. You're not doing it to show up on the start line with a six pack. You're doing it to finish strong and feel good and not crash and burn. So keeping those things in mind. And as for the salt piece, yeah, we absolutely want to, like, I mean, this is just every day. I mean, if you're an ultra runner, unless you're really not sweating very much at all, or you're not a salty sweater, but you are losing obviously more salt through sweat. So we want to be salting our foods. We want to be including sodium in the diet. We don't want to be scared of that because what we're losing mostly when we lose salts in the sweat, it's sodium and chloride, and to an extent potassium. So magnesium, calcium, and mostly potassium. Yes, we want to get those in the everyday diet. We don't need to worry about replacing those in electrolytes. But in terms of race prep specifically, if you are a heavy and or salty sweater, and or if it's going to be warm out, and keep in mind it doesn't need to be 90 degrees, like as you guys know, running and even 60 high 60s can feel hot at times. So if it's going to be a warmer day, or let's just say it's a really long and hard event and you just want to really optimize your hydration status, we can do what's called hyperhydrating or preloading, and that would be the night before with, say, your dinner. So it's your last, the dinner before your race, and we are basically adding a large amount of sodium along with a substantial amount of fluid. So the amount, the research varies a little bit, but the sweet spot seems to be somewhere around like 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So quite a bit. And you drink that in a full liter or 32 ounces of water. Now, you could also cut that in half because when we talk about electrolytes, it's all about concentration. So you could also do 750 milligrams in 16 ounces of water and start there if that feels good. And so that's where now, do you have to do a sports drink? Absolutely not. You can eat salty food and drink water, as part of your meal. And then it's in conjunction with the carbs. So carbs will also help rehydrate you faster. So we're having our carb rich meal at dinner, and whether you're having like white rice with a bunch of soy sauce or pickles or whatever it is that you're getting your salt, and then you're having plain water, or you're having, some sports drink that's formulated that's high. Like there are specific products out there. I'm thinking of, and they have different carb amounts, but for instance, like Precision Hydration has one, like their 1,500, or what is it? The Scratch super high sodium that's like 17 something or other. And then of course you could do something like a tailwind, which is lower, and then add the rest sodium in food. And that's handy when you really want the carbs in the drink, because when we're carb loading, sometimes we only have so much space for something and we really want to get some liquid carbs in. So there are lots of ways of going about that. So that would be at night. And then the morning of your event, you also have a carb and sodium rich drink is a very popular strategy to really make sure that because what we're essentially doing is we're increasing your blood plasma volume. We're really making sure you're well hydrated, and then you go into your event.
It's funny you talk about the stocking yourself up, so to speak, before a
Hmm.
race, like filling yourself up and being heavy.
Yeah.
Because I was crewing a very accomplished ultra runner here locally. His name is Greg Armstrong, and we were talking about he was on the 24-hour team for the United States, and so Greg's fairly accomplished. Um, and he literally was talking about that on the way back from him. He ran Scar, which is a smoky. He ran across the Smoky Mountains, and
Mm,
we were talking about how he gets ready for his races, and he
mm,
basically used that mentality that you had, where he eats a lot, right, and gets heavy, and he even made the comment like, I don't even worry about what my weight is going into a race because I'm building up, and then I bring it, then it comes and brings it down, and then after the race then it just kind of
yeah.
levels out. And so that's not the first time I've heard that, and so it's interesting to hear that's a pretty common thing, because other than him saying it, I've not heard it from a lot of other people, and then hearing you
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, and the distinction I would make is that we're not trying to get heavy, right? We're being very strategic about increasing our carbohydrate intake. So it's a very strategic type of eating, and it's based on your body weight. And even more than that, because maybe I'm throwing out that 8 gram per kilogram amount for carbs. So it's 8 grams of carb per kilogram of body weight, and someone's like, whoa, they calculate that out, and that number seems really high. What that tells me is that your day-to-day carbohydrate intake may not be high enough for what you do. Because you know what I'm usually starting my endurance athletes at roughly 5 gram per kilogram of daily carbohydrate, that being the goal. And sometimes I get people and they're like consuming 3. They're like not consuming very much, and yet they're training for an ultra marathon. They're putting in all these hours, all these miles, and we know based on the research and the guidelines that endurance athletes, including ultra runners, need anywhere between 5 and 12 grams per kilogram per day. So it's really important that in order to even be able to do a carbohydrate load and tolerate it, it's important that your day-to-day nutrition is in a good place. And that's always where we start, by the way. Like whenever I'm working with someone, we never dive into their performance nutrition. We do a complete full assessment of their everyday nutrition and make sure that's in a really good place, because that's the foundation of everything. You're just not going to succeed as an athlete or be healthy, which is the most important thing, um, if you don't have that, in a good place.
Makes sense.
So what does a good ultra runner's day-to-day diet look like? What does your diet
Oh,
look like if you're training for your
oh,
50? You know, what do
I
you
mean, but
how's your
so that's
breakfast? Yeah.
that's where, so again, like this is where, I mean, yes,
Very
I can tell you
subjective,
what
I
I
know.
eat.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter because, I am my own, like I'm
Hmm.
a different person with a different body weight size and different preferences and tolerances, and like we're all so different, and
Sure.
there really is no one size fits all. Like, yes, I can say, okay, great, yes, I want you to eat, you know based on your, I can give you guidelines for like, for instance, okay, protein. Usually endurance athletes, I'm aiming for like 1.4 to 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. We have increased protein needs, right? And we're going for mostly a lean protein. Like I can throw out guidelines, or hey, we want to get like lots of plant foods in just for general health and micronutrients and fiber. Like we can do stuff like that, but the what, like the specific what,
Hmm.
that's really dependent on you and your lifestyle and what foods you have access to. Can you cook? They're just, I
Sure.
can't tell you, like it looks so many different ways when I work with people and I talk with people. And even for me, like I have 2 little kids and I'm working, and sometimes there will be a night where I have cereal for dinner. It's like, well, that happened, who cares? It doesn't matter. We're really concerned more about overall patterns, and what's going on, how you're feeling. There's so many things that go into it. But like just from a basic standpoint, if we're talking about, okay, everyday fueling for endurance athletes like ultra runners, yeah, I mean, adequate carbs, that's huge. And and this will be a mix of simple carbohydrates surrounding workouts, right? And also more complex carbohydrates, more nutrient dense carbohydrates, starchy vegetables and beans and legumes, whole grains, fruit, whatever. We're getting all that stuff in, you know, we're getting enough vegetables, color, as they say, so fruits and vegetables. We're getting, and just looking at the whole list of various nutrients where you're getting that from. So for me, like if someone comes to me and say, oh, I don't eat dairy, like I'm always going to ask why and make sure it's not like a red flag for something else I should be investigating. But at the end of the day, if you just don't like it or it doesn't sit well in your stomach or whatever, like fine, okay, we need to get protein, calcium, vitamin D, and all these other things somewhere else, So that's where, again, it doesn't really matter what I do, like what works for you and what do you enjoy? Because also, if you're not enjoying your food, you're not satisfied, you're going to go rummaging around looking for junk and other stuff, because it really is important. Food is more than fuel. It connects us to other people. We eat in social situations and cultural, religious. I mean, there's so many reasons why we eat. And it's not just for our sport, although I'm sure, it can feel like that sometimes, that we're just like stuffing our face because we're hungry from running so much. But yeah, there are lots of reasons why we eat, and we have to take all those things into account.
Sure. Sure. Um, so what would you say to someone in neither of the three of us are, but it's growing in popularity. There are some people in the office that I work at that are on the carnivore
Mm-hmm.
diet and all those things.
Oh
And I
God.
know that there are, thank you. Thank you. And I know that there are some, um, you know, keto athletes.
Yep.
What would you
I've
say?
had I've had one on my show twice. Mike
And
McKnight,
and
he's
I know
great.
that there's a big conversation
Mm-hmm.
that happens between a really well-known running coach and a really well-known athlete. They kind of have a conversation on social medias about whether keto athletes are like for longevity purposes and all those kind of things. But how do you approach a keto athlete who's like, no, it has to be this way because I want to stay in constant ketosis and I drink my ketone IQ all day and all these other things. Is that a how is that good, or how can that be a tactic for longevity, which is one of the things that it totes, is my understanding of it. And how can you coach someone along the way and be like, okay, if this is really what you want to do, then this is where we have to start? Or how would you handle a carnivore athlete, I guess?
So I personally haven't gotten a client who came to me wanting to be on a carnivore diet, most likely because they know that I'm not supportive of that, right? But I have gotten people who attempted to be, on the ketogenic diet or some version of low carb. I mean, whenever someone says low carb, there's no definition for that, right? So I always have to clarify what that means for them, because someone's like, I'm on a low carb diet, and it's like, they're not really that low. I mean, it's lower than what they need, but they're not actually that low. So yeah, if they're truly on like a ketogenic diet, it is very much a fad diet, or in the popular space. I know it works for many people, but it just doesn't work for most people. And I know there is a community in the endurance world that is very vocal about it. And I mean, what I say about more extreme diets, there's always going to be someone who it works for. There will be outliers, and there will be people who are very passionate about it and they want to speak about it. And if that works for you, great. Like, again, you do you.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
my job as a nutrition professional is to state what is supported in the research. And research, I mean, nutrition science is a young science, and obviously we don't have all the answers. And you brought up ketones. Like, ketone research is in its infancy, and there are a lot of positive anecdotes, and we see some really high level runners like being, using this stuff and
Mm-hmm.
being sponsored. And so it kind of is mind boggling that the research isn't there. But it's not. There's no evidence that ketones are are beneficial to performance. Not what we see. There's some potentially promising research in the recovery space, but definitely not for during exercise. And yet we see a lot of people using it. So my point is that like research isn't always like the be all end all. Like, yes, that we are like, my profession is an evidence-based profession. That's what we do. And then we also look at, we're not live and die by it. We also look at experience. We look at the stories we see from people, right? But at the end of the day, I can make a recommendation to somebody and say, I think ketones aren't worth, if they're very expensive and they taste like crap. Like, I don't think it's worth it. Why don't you invest your money in something else more worthwhile that has a little bit more, a better ROI? But also, if you're curious and you just want to try it, that's your decision. So if someone's coming to me and I mean, again, I'm not going to take you through being on a carnivore diet. That's just, I'm like, you're just not the right client for me. If you want to do that on your own, that's your business. So if you want to try the ketogenic diet as a marathon or as an ultra marathoner, I can present the evidence showing that that's not beneficial, most likely. But if you want to live that experience, like, again, that's your choice. It's your body. Like, I have no right to tell you not to do that unless you're hiring me, and then I will give you my professional opinion. But yeah, in terms of carnivore, there's decades of research supporting that carbs are beneficial for endurance performance. And, there's studies looking at, for instance, like the whole concept of like training low, which is like training low carb or fasted or whatever. Like, there's always this discussion of like fasted versus fueled workouts. Um, and when we look at the research, it's not only that it doesn't have a clear performance benefit when you're training with low carbohydrate availability, but it also has negative impacts on, recovery, on your ability to actually use carbs as effectively, as efficiently on race day, for instance, when you really need them. It can compromise, your immune system. I mean, there's just all these potentially negative effects to it. There's also just there's a lot of research coming out around the something called REDS, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, relative energy deficiency in sport, or you might hear people talk about low energy availability. And actually, I literally just saw this posted on social media right before I hopped on this call. But Kelly Pritchett and Keely Henninger, who I'm sure ultra runner, just did a study on actually, I should pull it up. Well, it's okay. I'm not gonna. I literally glanced at it, so I'm not gonna be able to do it justice talking about it here. But they are doing a study in trail runners on low carbohydrate availability, low energy availability, and all of that, and just all the negative things that can happen. I see REDs all the time. I work with a lot of recreational endurance athletes, and I see it all the time, and it has devastating impacts on health. And it's not just performance, but on your health. And it impacts literally if you are chronically not taking in not just enough energy, but also not enough carbs, it can really impact like every organ system in the body. So again, like we do see, I'm not denying the experiences of certain athletes. For instance, like I always think of Mike McKnight, who, because he's been on my show twice. He's a lovely person. And I told him very clearly, like, I would never recommend that anyone does what you do, but I also respect the fact that it works for you and you're seeing some success. Now, what's going to happen in the long term? I don't know. I don't know, but it clearly is working for some people and they're strategically bringing carbs in at times. But as a systematic recommendation, as a diet, like, no, that is not supportive of performance. It is not supportive of long-term health. Like, how can you sit here and say a carnivore diet, which doesn't include plant foods, is supportive of longevity? That is the most backwards thing I've ever heard. Like, please show me the research showing that, because I don't know of any research, and maybe I'm wrong. I will always admit to being wrong. If you present a well-designed study showing me that, fine. But as far as I know, that is not what the evidence says. So
I mean,
I
he
am
literally sits
definitely
there.
not on board.
Yeah, he literally sits there in the break room in the office with his pound of ground beef and his stick of butter. And I'm just like, there's no way.
Those are not good for heart health. Those are things
just,
that are legit not good for heart health.
Yeah, and he's like, I've lost so
No.
much weight doing this. I'm like, yeah, because you're not eating anything good for you. Like, whatever.
And then,
It's
yeah, anyways, yeah,
like you
no,
said, it
no.
works for some people. And I just
Yeah,
the minute you reintroduce carbs, you're just gonna put all the way back on, my man. Like,
But more than that, it's also like, is this like, I always ask people something like, is this sustainable for you? And that's any eating pattern. It doesn't need to be an extreme diet. Maybe you're trying to like shrink your body to a size it just doesn't want to be. Like, is this sustainable for you? Or are you not able to participate in social events because you only eat like one food or whatever it is, you know? So again, that goes back to the role of food in our lives. It's not just for performance. It's not just to lose weight. It's not just for these things. Like, it's how we connect to other human beings, because that's what we are first and foremost. We're human beings, you know? So I don't know.
I connect to a Reese's peanut butter cup every day.
we
So,
Good for you.
we give him such a hard time because the amount of Reese Easter eggs that I'm sure he's already consumed. It's just a running
Oh,
joke
is the
between
Easter candy already out? I guess it probably
the
is.
Easter candy is out already, and I got some clearance. I bought a whole bag of clearance Reese's peanut butter cups and ate like the whole bag in like about 5 minutes with no regrets
Mm.
whatsoever.
Hey, you know what? Good for you. And you know, whenever people like whenever someone's doing something like that, I bring it back to a couple things. Number one, like, well, you said you have no regrets. Then great. Did you feel good afterwards?
Yes,
So the
actually, I
answer would
did.
either wonderful. So then period, we're done. Case closed. You know what I mean? But often the case is, oh my God, I binged on this bag of thing. Now I feel so crappy and my stomach hurts and I feel so guilty. And it's like, okay, well, were you hungry and you just didn't eat and then that was there? Or maybe like pay attention to how you feel. I mean, there's like, so like for you, wonderful. But like a lot of people come to me with a very different version of that, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's the really bad part with our diet is for a lot of folks, it's really a lot of people have a really unhealthy relationship with food. Um,
100%.
and it's really it's really tragic that that's where our society has gone, where a lot of people have such a horrible relationship with food and they feel guilty about eating this because they're worried about what it's going to do to their body, and they don't want to do, it's all such a murky, messy situation, and it's terrible because I know social media has done a lot to it. um and I just hate that because I have 4 girls,
Yeah.
and so you
I
you
have
can
two
and they're
girls.
and they're all grown. I'm 47, and so all mine are older and they're all grown. But I have seen 2 of my kids very much. Well, actually, 3 of them have had a very unhealthy relationship with food,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
and it's just and it's a really bad situation. But like you said, if you can eat and you walk away from it and there's no issues with it, then that's great. But then it becomes an issue when you have regrets, or you shouldn't have eaten that, or you feel bad, or like, it's just
Yeah,
it's
this is
just
a huge, huge part of the work that I do with almost all my clients, because the number one thing I see with endurance athletes is that they're underfueled. And sometimes it's unintentional because their needs are just so high and they had no idea. And they feel like they're eating to fullness or whatever. But as we know with athletes, you can't always trust like hunger and fullness signals. Sometimes you have to eat when you're not hungry, like after a long run or whatever. Um, but yeah, and then a lot of times it's intentional because they have a poor relationship with food. They're not eating consistently, they're just all over the map. They're binging because they're starving, they're not sleeping well. They maybe have GI issues. So like GI issues actually occur when you are chronically underfueling, and everyone always thinks, oh, it's something I'm eating, and it can be, that can be it. GI issues are very complicated obviously, but sometimes when you're just not eating enough, one of the things that happens with chronic low energy availability, or REDS, is that everything just slows down. So like your GI tract, like the motility, everything is just slowing down, and you have poor food tolerance and all these issues. And then of course it starts the vicious cycle of like, I'm not eating stuff. And then you have the body image, mental side of things, which is also interfering with your ability to eat enough. I mean, It's such a huge thing. And no wonder, I mean, we're bombarded with messaging, especially as women, or young girls. We are bombarded from a very young age of we're supposed to look this way or whatever, you know? So, and men too, you know, it's not just, I work with many men who have struggles with it too. So it's really, really hard. And actually, I'm on my podcast, the episode that's coming out tomorrow. We address a lot about weight and body image and body gratitude and just like all these different things. But yeah, it's a huge, huge thing and takes a long time to work on. I mean, I really it takes decades for this stuff to build up, and even longer, not longer, but it doesn't take like it's not overnight that we unravel these things. You know, we really have to chip away at it.
Oh, 100%. And I think like for me, like, I'm 47, so it's not like I'm going out to the club and I'm married and,
Sure.
I have
Yeah.
nothing to prove or anything. But at the same time, I don't want to let myself go and spiral
Yeah.
because, I'm getting close to 50 and, that's when everything starts to fall apart. They
Doesn't have
already,
to.
they already call me boomer in this group, but I'm hyper sensitive to making sure that I'm eating fairly decent other than the occasional Reese's peanut butter cup.
Bag of
And
Reese's
whatnot.
peanut
And
butter
and and
cups.
so I guess a quick question is, do people come to you looking for like help around stuff like that? Like around like, they're an endurance athlete and maybe at the same time they're aging and they're trying to maybe dial in their kind of their nutrition around endurance running and their age at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, I work with not just runners, I work with all kinds of endurance athletes and also non-endurance athletes. So like just active people just who are, doing their Peloton or whatever it is they're doing. So I'm not just working with runners, but I work with predominantly active people. Because of my training, I have a clinical background. So I'm working with on all kinds of issues. Again, I'm taking my whoever's coming to me, I'm taking them as a or looking at them as a whole person, right? Again, we're not just looking at a singular issue, we're really looking at them as a whole because everything's always connected. But yes, I mean, the mental component as a roadblock to eating enough is huge, and also just how you feel each and every day. Obviously, like I get people in all kinds of different states. Once in a while, I get someone who is literally just like, sure, tell me what to do, and I do it, and it's no big deal, and they make the changes, and boom, we're done, and they're super simple. Does not happen very often. First of all, it's always a guy when that does happen, and it's not really often. Most of the time we're dealing with various, maybe we have a medical condition that we're looking at, maybe there's eating disorder or disordered eating going on, maybe there's not really disordered eating or eating disorder, but there's just like a mental struggle and like obsession with weight, or maybe obsession is the wrong word, but they really are kind of fixated on this idea of like, I have to lose weight, or I have to look a certain way, or oh, my body's gross, or all those kinds of ideas. A lot of people come to me with a lot of food rules and food beliefs and food fears that we're breaking down. That's like an exercise that I do. Actually, I have a freebie on my website that you can download. It's a little worksheet where you write down what are your food rules, your food fears, and your food beliefs, and we kind of try to chip away at them one by one. And an example, so a food rule would be like, I'm only allowed to have a bagel on a long run day, and a food belief in that context would be carbs make me fat. A food fear is like, I'm afraid of getting weight. I don't know, like you can come up with all these different things. And sometimes people have these things in their mind that are very clear and they're very aware of them. And sometimes you're not even aware of them at all. And I'll use myself as an example. Like I had an eating disorder in high school and college, and, kind of had some struggles when I was in my, up until my early 20s. And one of the things I avoided because, it wasn't good for you and all stuff was like mayonnaise. And I just never bought mayonnaise. And I swear it didn't even occur to me, like it was long behind me, but it wasn't until maybe a few years ago, someone was eating mayonnaise and I was like, why don't I ever have mayonnaise around? I was like, oh yeah, like that just was something that I was so conditioned Like, I think in my mind, it turned into like, I don't like mayonnaise, but actually mayonnaise is delicious in my tuna fish. Why would I not have a little bit? There's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? So sometimes
Hmm.
you don't even realize these little things that hang around. I had a client the other day who never ate carbs or tried not to eat carbs after 4 p.m. because of a passing comment a trainer told her 10 years ago that she had no need to eat carbs at night, because she was just going to bed and not doing anything. And so every time she would have carbs at night, she'd feel guilty. It's like, how sad is that? You know what I mean? It's just there are these things that hang around that's a passing comment, this and that, something we read on social media by some like influencer doesn't know jack shit. You know, it's like these things just kind of hang up. So it's we work through a lot of different things in my practice, but yeah, it's a big one for sure.
Wow. So basically you're like a food psychologist.
I mean, we call it, I mean, I call it nutrition coaching on the site, but like nutrition counseling is also what it's called. And there a lot, and a lot of my clients, so I collaborate with therapists all the time. And so there will, again, there will be times where we aren't going there, but a lot of times I mean, there's a little bit of overlap. I'm not a therapist, obviously, but there is a little bit of overlap between me and a therapist. And when I'm collaborating with some, especially when someone has, you know, an eating disorder history or whatever, there are other struggles, like we talk about that because food is so connected to all these things in our life. And sometimes people also just need some support and encouragement. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of thing going on.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, and I guess, it's interesting talking with you. It's like this stuff exists, but like until you really start unpacking it all in an open conversation like this, you don't really realize the pure impact that food has on a person's life,
Oh
just
yeah.
each and every day of how we function. And it's wild now just listening to you answer Garrett's questions and answering mine too, because I've actually had some fairly decent questions. I'm proud of myself. Um, you know, uh, I'm not the scientific one. John is the one who hasn't said hardly anything.
I know.
Is
I was
our
like, you've been silent
local
this whole time.
he's actually the most accomplished runner of the group, and
He's our
Oh.
is
resident historian.
and he knows a lot about running
And you got the
and
whole map in the background. It looks very
he's got
serious
the whole
back there.
map in the background. He actually lives really close to the Smoky Mountains and runs out there a whole lot.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. I've never run there.
You should.
Wait. I was in Asheville. Is that Smoky Mountains?
that's more of the Black Mountains. It's part of
Black
the
Mountains. Okay.
larger Appalachian chain.
Yeah. Yeah. I ran part of the AT. Like we visited for like a long weekend, but yeah, I haven't, that's the closest I got.
So I will ask a question though, because one thing I'm curious about. So a couple of us, we've had various levels of coaching, but it's geared more towards the running. And I don't think any of us ever had any type of like nutrition coaching or counseling, as you said. So I'm kind of curious, like, what does that relationship look like? Like, if one of us approached you, where do we start? What type of
Mhm.
data do we like to capture? And then how do we analyze that and create a plan?
Totally. Yeah. So, as I said, I am looking at you as a whole person. So, you're not just coming to me as a runner. Like, we are looking at, like, I like to call it like the life landscape because, as I said, everything is connected. And there are lots of details of your life, whether it's like a commute to work or where you do your food shopping or who else is being fed in the household. I mean, there's just so many things every single day that influence what you eat, your decision making, your ability to get food, etc. So, so yeah, if someone comes to me and they want to work with me, I have a very long questionnaire they fill out. Just give me tons of background so we can really dive right in. The first session is pretty long. It's 75 minutes. I used to say like 60 to 75, but now it's just like 75. It used to be 90, and I was like, okay, that's a little too much. But we're really just going in. I want to learn everything that's relevant about you and get a really good sense of you and your life, your goals, your challenges, like what's going on. So yeah, the things that we're capturing, obviously like medical history, diet history, weight history. I mean, lots of those details are going in. And after that session, I have people keep like a food journal for me. We don't ever do calorie counting. I'm not interested in that. It's a descriptive journal, and it gives me context. It tells me the story of what your day is like. Like I want to see, you wake up, how did you sleep, and then like the time of day and how everything just unfolds across the day. So a lot of times I talk about context being so important. I'll ask someone like, what's the context of this? Like, why did this happen? And we're just trying to understand so we can problem solve. So we look at those things. And then in terms of what we track, it's not uncommon for someone to come to me and, maybe they're saying either explicitly or not that, they're looking at weight for performance, or, oh, I just want to lose a little weight, or, lean out a little bit. And that's not always the case, but sometimes, people are saying that. And, what I'm always telling them is, first of all, we never work on weight loss during a training cycle. That's a hard no. But even if we decide it's appropriate, it's the off season, whatever, we're always evaluating everything else and making all these different changes, because what I always like to remind people is that weight and body comp are like two among a huge list of factors that affect performance. So in terms of what do we track, well, maybe we're tracking energy levels at a certain time of day. If it really depends on the challenges, like what are the challenges for you? Are you telling me that you feel like crap after every long run and you're really exhausted, or you're not sleeping well, or you're starving, at this time of day, or, like the things we track will depend on what are the goals, what are the challenges, what are we trying to solve. So, but yeah, we definitely are looking at energy levels, sleep quality, recovery, how that's going, performance, like how are you feeling during runs and other sessions. Maybe we are tracking weight, but only if it's not causing like distress when you see a number, and also as long as you're tracking other things, we don't want to just be looking at weight. And yeah, so we're tracking all these things, and I always give people a long list of goals based on what gets uncovered in a session, and we kind of go from there. And sometimes it's, hey, you haven't been to the doctor in 2 years, and like, let's get some lab work and make sure like there's no things going on we need to check out. There's a lot of that after the pandemic, a lot. And there are common things we see in terms of nutrient deficiencies, like, vitamin D, especially this time of year. So we just kind of make sure that everything's good. Or maybe it's like, hey, I see you're taking 10 supplements and I don't know why, like, let's maybe cut some of those out, or some of these are bogus or whatever. So, we're doing kind of a lot of shifting around. Or, hey, I noticed you're having like one piece of toast and one egg for breakfast. That's not enough for you, ultra runner. So let's add, instead of like overhauling everything, let's take what you're doing now and add things to it, and just tweak what you're already doing to make it better. So it's like a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, and then we kind of see what comes up from session to session. But typically we're starting with the everyday. In the next session, we're working on performance nutrition, and kind of, going from there.
Well, I just want to say this, and I think you just made a good call out around blood work. It's extremely underrated.
Oh yeah, crucial.
Because a few years ago, I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago, I went to get a physical and found out that I was vitamin D deficient, even running outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I even drink milk throughout the week. I have coffee with cream in it, and so the doctor, so since then, he's had me taking vitamin D. And ever since I've been on vitamin D, it's leveled out my vitamin D levels to the actual level it needs to be, which is crazy. I'm still not over it. I'm like right on the line, which it shows you where I was. But see, I didn't even know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never have known that if I wouldn't have gotten the blood work. And
A
I
lot
think,
of people, a lot of people are low in vitamin D. It's one of the most common ones that we supplement, especially at this time of year, for sure.
and I didn't realize how important it was to
Yes,
not
very.
be vitamin D deficient.
So vitamin D plays so many key roles in the body, so many. And immune function and bone health, we need it for calcium absorption. I mean, just lots and lots of stuff. And the thing about vitamin D that's interesting. So when it comes to supplementation, we're always trying to go for like a food first approach. Like ideally, you are getting these things in food and not just from supplements, unless there's evidence that you need it, right? Like you shouldn't ever be just willy-nilly like supplementing stuff. There are a couple exceptions that I can mention, but with vitamin D, especially because it's a fat soluble vitamin, we want to always test first before adding it on. A lot of people are like, oh, so and so's taking it, I should take it, or it's just winter. You might very well be low, but do get tested. It's really, really important for any fat soluble vitamins. And also with vitamin D, the thing is that our primary source is the sun. So we make vitamin D in the skin from UVB radiation, and there are some food sources, primarily fatty fish, and yes, some fortified products like milk or OJ or some cereal or whatever, but it's primarily fatty fish, and we are not able to meet our needs through food. It's one of those things where we actually need sun exposure. So we can't really take a food first approach in the sense that we can meet our entire needs from that, which we can with the case of many other micronutrients. But yeah, vitamin D, we really rely on the sun. And unfortunately, with the sun, a lot of things get in the way of our ability to make it. So for instance, increased age, although it's not 47, don't worry, it's much older. If you have a darker skin tone, if you're using sunscreen, if you're covering your skin, obviously you can't, make it. If during, I'd say like late fall to early spring, if you live in the northern half of the US, so kind of the time of year and also the latitude of where you live, the time of the day, like there are all these things that reduce how much we can make, and thus our ability to meet our needs. The other thing I would say about vitamin D specifically, but it also plays in with iron, is sometimes the lab values they give it, like everyone's like, oh, well, it says it was normal. That's not optimal. And it's certainly not normal for an endurance athlete. Also, normal, like, or common normal does not mean that's something we shoot for. Okay. So with vitamin D specifically, we want it, like, I think it's still being debated, the different levels, but typically you're deficient if you're less than 20. 30 is like, or is it, I don't have all these things memorized. I know we want over 50. That's where we want to be. And I want to say sufficient is above 30, if I remember correctly. And then 20 to 30 is insufficient.
That's right.
I may have gotten that wrong. Yeah,
That's
I think I got that. I literally just finished this massive course on performance nutrition and everyday nutrition. So a lot of this stuff is in my brain right now, which is why I have all this. I had like a 2-hour lecture on supplements. But yeah, so vitamin D. And then the other one that often comes up is ferritin, or your iron storage. And, I get people all the time, oh, well, my doctor said my ferritin was normal. I'm like, well, what was your ferritin? It was 18. I'm like, that is a horrible ferritin. That is not normal. We want it above like 40, or ideally above 50. So yeah, you just have to you want to keep in mind that yes, blood work is extremely important to get at least once a year. And you also want to, consider, is your doctor like a sports informed provider? Do they know that endurance athletes sometimes need different things than the average person? And if not, you need to do that research on your own.
So 100%. So what she's saying is, so like for me, my doctor, once he found out what I did or what I do, mainly did, since I'm not doing a whole lot of it right now, he catered a lot of around knowing what I do. Like he would look at my blood work and say, well, because you do this is how it is. And like, I had a bad calcium scoring test that came back, and he was like, that's not normal. He said, because you run so much, your heart health should be much better than this. And so it's important to do all that. And we say all this because she is a nutritionist and dietitian, but at the same time, all this plays into the role of your health and how you're going to be able to perform in these races if you have the correct information put out in front of you. So Garrett, do you have any more questions before we sign off tonight, so we can let Let her have back her night.
Oh, absolutely. I could keep going. Like I told them, I was like, I could do a whole seminar with her.
Oh, I know. Me too. The more she talks, I'm just like, hold on.
So, yes, there are, but we would love to have you on at a later date where we can address some more, especially, because it is almost race season. I've got a race in April. John's got one coming up, so we can get
Hmm.
more into what should we pick over at aid stations? What should we make sure we have? So I think that would be a great one if you're up for it and want to hang out with us three trashy fellas uh, to kind of go over as race season really kicks in and kind of and also the recovery aspect. Okay, great. You just had a 100
Yeah.
mile race. Now you need to focus on A, B, and C so you can recover faster so you can get ready for your next 100 mile race in 2 months or whenever it may be. But yeah, so I
Absolutely.
I have tons of questions that I will save for a later date. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just about to say, like, as I said, I've been working forever on this course, like last 6 months or so on this, because I do, one-to-one nutrition work, and I've been a dietitian for nearly 10 years, and I've been meaning to like put out some sort of course or something. So I'm like finally putting this thing out, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I'm just like, I literally I recorded 8 hours of content, and I'm just like, I could have gone even more into depth. There's nutrition is just a massive, massive topic.
mhm.
But it's important stuff, and yeah, I'd be happy to chat more about the stuff. It's you know when and nutrition's a huge thing, but I will say, we can't just focus on nutrition in a vacuum. Like, even if you nail your nutrition, which almost no one is doing, but that I see, like, everyone can. I've never, in the hundreds, if not thousands, of people I've worked with, I've never found someone that we couldn't improve something, right? And even me, like, I do a crap job sometimes. Um, so, it's not just nutrition. Like, we have to focus on sleep. We have to focus on rest from exercise, like smart training, right? Like managing life stress, and none of that stuff's easy. But if we're talking about recovery, you can nail your recovery nutrition. And if the rest of your life is a complete disaster, like, you're not going to recover well. So, you know, I just encourage everybody, as much as it's within your ability. Obviously, some people are just in a season of life where things are crazy and there's only so much you can do. So I always try to tell people, like, try to manage expectations, especially when it comes to performance. We have guidelines, we have these recommendations, but wouldn't it be nice if we all had homemade meals every day and always ate enough vegetables, did all this stuff? But I'm a realist. I have two little kids. I work with a lot of other busy people who are just trying to hold it together from one day to the next. And life is crazy, and you can only do so much. So we're all just doing our best every single day, myself included, and that's all we can do. So, yeah, so set small, manageable goals and chip away at it, and just keep moving the needle.
That's awesome. Well, before we sign off, let folks know how can they reach you? Because I've started I've started listening to your last episode, your last podcast.
Oh,
I'm about 15,
cool.
20 minutes to it, but go
Oh,
ahead and go ahead and tell everybody how they can get in touch with you and how to
yeah,
find you.
totally. So my company's Eat for Endurance. My website is just eatforendurance.com, and you can get all the information you need there. My podcast, the Eat for Endurance podcast, I do 2 episodes a month, and I alternate between what I call athlete nutrition profiles, which I'm trying to incorporate more recreational people, but it's a lot of high performing athletes. I've had a lot of really amazing trail runners, including like Courtney Dauwalter and John Kelly and all these cool people on. I've been really lucky to get some big names on there, but and it's really just telling the story of their life essentially through a nutrition lens. This is the inspiration of the show. And then I also have a lot of fellow sports dietitians on, and we chat about fun topics and just kind of, chat about whatever, we think we want to share with the audience. So there's that. And then my really big thing is literally next week. I feel like I'm giving birth to something as I'm launching this course. It's called Peak Performance for Endurance Athletes: Your Ultimate Guide to Strategic Fueling. And it covers the everyday stuff, a lot of the stuff that we talked about, including even some of the body image kind of weight stuff and struggles there. So there's that. And then it's about 7 modules, like 8 hours of content. And then it goes through all the different aspects of performance fueling. So like hydration, fueling before, during, and after exercise, training the gut, supplementation. That's a beast of a lecture. It's like, split into 2, and then race week. So it literally covers everything you want to know about performance nutrition for endurance athletes, including ultra runners. And I have some ultra running examples in there. So if you're looking for, and it's just a pre-recorded self-paced course. So if you're not looking for one-to-one work, although I am accepting new clients, then that's a great resource for you.
That's awesome. So essentially, if you're looking for something of a highbrow caliber, a high class type of production, look up Claire. Continue to if you want to continue on the same path that you're on listening, just continue to come to us. But we appreciate you, Claire.
Yeah. And I'm over on Instagram too. I forgot to mention I'm Eat for Endurance on Instagram. That's where I'm most active.
Yes, that's where I found you. So,
cool. Very cool.
So yeah. So 100%. Look her up, guys. She is outstanding. Just a reminder. We're doing a whole bunch of stuff. Playing around with merch. We're playing around. We finally started just putting videos up and still trying to get a handle on all that. And we got a whole lot of guests booked out. We've been working hard. We have about we're up to almost 2 months worth of people booked out now. Garrett's already trying to get people in May. So pretty soon we're going to have people booked out all the way through the rest of the year. Garrett's very excited. So we have got a whole lot of folks lined up, high quality, super good guests coming on that can teach us some stuff. So we appreciate everybody as always. Find us on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Like I said, we even signed up for TikTok. I mean, boy, we are down with the youngsters now, folks. So look us up on any of those things. And of course,
the boomer is down with the youngsters.
I am down with the youngsters. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. Even if you have an Android phone, which isn't very good, you can still listen to us on whatever you need to. Just find us on any of that. Have a good night, guys. We'll see you later.